Be on high alert because this episode of Nuclear News could truly blow your mind. All I'm going to do is lay out the fundamentals of what happened in this space. You guys decide where this is all headed. First, let's talk about the price action on the week in uranium stocks. Last week, the spot Uranium Miners ETF was down 1.58%. Compare that to the S&P 500, which was down 6%. Has the great divergence begun? Uranium has been outperforming the broader market for the last year. This is very significant price action, and we're going to dive into exactly why uranium is diverging and will diverge from the broader market. This is where it gets very exciting. I've been saying for a long time that we're entering a period like the 1970s, where commodities truly diverge for good reason from the broader market. And so what do we have now? Billionaire investor Ray Dalio warns soaring inflation under Biden will send America back to the 1970s. We're going to have a period of stagflation. Ray Dalio is one of the most successful hedge fund managers of all time. He does a lot of research. He has hundreds of people on his research team, if not thousands. This is what they've come up with. So let's look at the chart of the S&P 500 back then. I've said this is exactly what I'm expecting in the broader market, just a whipsawing back and forth, going nowhere stock market for the next few years. Again, look at the chart of the S&P 500, look at the chart of the NASDAQ. We just made our first leg lower. And so expect some chop. Now, the action in this time is going to be in commodities. This is what happened to commodities back in the 70s and early 80s. Look at silver. This is when it spiked from $4 to over $35 for the first time in its history. Look at the cost of energy back then. We had oil spiking from $3.50 up to $40, all while the stock market was literally going nowhere, volatile. Pretty much it was a lost decade is what happened. And so wouldn't you expect that to happen to punish all the people for chasing the charts at the highs after a 20-year bull market? It's all playing out that way. So why is uranium specifically outperforming the broader market so much? Well, last week we had some of the biggest news an investor could ever expect. We've been alluding to this type of news for a long time. And so it's finally happening. Here's the headline. US seeks $4.3 billion for uranium to wean off Russia's supply. Plan would boost enriched uranium purchases from US producers. Biden administration proposal requires approval from Congress. So they want to pump government money into the US uranium industry. What happens whenever the government pumps money into anything is prices rise in that industry. Look at the cost of college when the US funds everyone's college with cheap student loans. Price goes exponentially higher. People take advantage of the government's money and raise prices, right? Well, what do you think is going to happen to the US domestic uranium industry with this influx of capital once this finally passes? Everything's going to go up. Look what happens to housing prices when the governments prop up mortgages with cheap interest rates. Everything pumps. So what the government is doing is subsidizing a massive pump in uranium locally. See prior videos on why they are doing this. It's obviously the Russian war. We want to move away from that cheap historic source of enriched and raw uranium. And so it's happening. And so even if this wasn't going to happen, well, we had a multi-year supply crunch and prices had to rise. Well, now they're going to rise even faster once this stuff goes through. Uranium miners soar on US plan to wean off Russian supply. The report said it would create a government buyer to directly purchase enriched uranium used in new advanced reactors under development in an attempt to spur the development of more domestic capacity, reducing its reliance on enriched imports from Russia. But currently, the US's domestic uranium industry is limited to just one remaining commercial enrichment plant owned by Urenco in New Mexico at a time of increasing concerns globally. Although the plans will still require approval from Congress, we expect this to provide significant tailwinds for the uranium sector and particularly U.S. nuclear fuel chain participants. So this is good for all uranium miners in Western and non-Eastern Russia jurisdictions, obviously, as supply chains move west. One of them is Uranium Energy Corps, And the president, Amir Adnani, just said this: the week's announcement by the Biden administration potentially marks the beginning of a new chapter in the future of the domestic U.S. nuclear fuel industry. In light of Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine, the Biden administration is proposing a plan whereby the Department of Energy is asking Congress for approval of domestic low-enriched uranium. We look forward to working with the Department of Energy to advance U.S. national energy security interests in domestic uranium capabilities as the U.S. transitions away from Russia's supply. It could not get any bigger than this for uranium miners. Mothballed uranium mines, this comes from the Wall Street Journal. Mothballed uranium mines get new lease on life as energy prices soar. We have this article. Clearly, CNBC has been watching these videos because they just put out this article this week: why nuclear energy is on the verge of a renaissance. And they released a video explaining what we've been talking about and what John Quakes and others, Terry Popino, so many other shrewd early stage investors have been talking about. CNBC is finally on board. This is obviously the mainstream media, obviously parroting the talking points of the global elite, which want to invest in nuclear, which have greenified it, and which clearly are funding and supporting the nuclear renaissance, which is occurring globally. Now let's look around the world. We know one holdout who's been fighting the obvious for so long is Germany. John Quakes retweeted this: if this doesn't push Germany to extend the life of 3 reactors slated to retire in December, nothing will. So we know Germany's trying to wean themselves off of uranium at the absolute worst time. You would think that eventually their population would vote in their own self-interest and potentially move to a clean, safe, reliable green energy source, because we have this electricity shock. German 1-year power contract monthly average. Look at how exponentially that has gone up. That is extreme. Nothing is causing that from slowing down anytime soon. There's a supply crunch in oil as well. And so unfortunately, it is very unfortunate that Europe and Germany has to go through this and has not quite caught on to almost what every other country has already realized, which is that uranium is the solution. And so to close out, let me summarize exactly where we are in this space, because there is so much going on. We have a supply-demand crunch, long-term, sustained. We have massive government intervention by the wealthiest governments around the world, pumping money into this space and the infrastructure to build it. We have a spot price, which is way too low to incentivize any of the uranium production needed to fuel the demand for nuclear energy in the future. We have uranium miners, which are going to make an absolute fortune once the newly subsidized uranium spot price rises. They put their assets into production and start to cash flow. We have a nuclear renaissance around the world. Every single country we've covered at length how bullish this space is, with small modular reactors and new technologies causing this space to be safer and more widely adopted in the future, causing more demand for this asset class. Geopolitics, the Russian war in Ukraine, this is not going away anytime soon. The United States, Western countries have been able to live in deflationary environments, partly because we've been able to source raw materials out of Russia for the last few decades for cheap. Well, that is going away. It's not coming back anytime soon. So supply chains need to completely shift. Money needs to be poured into natural resources. Companies are going to make an absolute fortune. Camco, we're going to talk to a lot of the CEOs in this space and really give you guys a breakdown of what is going on. We have a multi-year tech and stock market bubble similar to the 1970s starting to unravel. We may have a few lost years in terms of the stock market as people transition away from those assets which don't do well in inflationary environments into real assets like uranium and oil and energy and other commodities. If I'm missing something, let me know, but I'm sure I am. And I'm sure there's a lot more to go over and cover in this space. But the reality is the stars are all aligning in favor of this bull market, this coming bull market in uranium assets, not to mention that you can have exposure to the space with the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust, Yellow Cake PLC taking supply off the market. Perfect storm is setting up. We have new scale power, new technology that you can invest in to get exposure in this space. We'll stay on top of this market. Timing could not be better. We'll keep bringing you guys insights, data, and everything you need to understand what is going on